I love Looney Tunes, and if you're a fan of animation, you probably do too. Beginning in 1930 and originally running through 1969, Warner Brothers produced 1,000 animated shorts released under the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies banner. Originally created as a satirical alternative to Walt Disney's Silly Symphony shorts, these cartoons quickly developed an identity of their own, especially when characters like Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, Porky Pig, Elmer Fudd, and many more became stars with their own recurring appearances, catchphrases, and types of stories. Really, I've always had a deep love for the Looney Tunes ever since I was a little kid, but it's something I've never really touched on in the channel. But recently, Warner Brothers and studio head David Zaslav have turned their destructive gaze on the franchise that might be the most synonymous with their company. In just the last year, Warner Brothers sold off their Looney Tunes feature film The Day the Earth Blew Up to another studio, have only just now sold off another they locked away for years, have removed all Looney Tunes material from their streaming service Max, and plan to tear down the studio that once brought these shorts to life. But this isn't a rant against the studio. This is a celebration of art, and a discussion of why a series once thought of as disposable became an important pillar of animation in the 20th century. And in the history of the Looney Tunes, few shorts are as celebrated or as influential as Chuck Jones and Michael Maltese's What's Opera Doc from 1957. But why does this spoof of Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle stand above so many other classics? And what did it take to bring it to life? A look back at one of the greatest Looney Tunes of all time can help us understand why, no matter what a studio may think today, Looney Tunes stands as one of the most important pieces of American animation. The Looney Tunes may have begun in 1930 with Sinkin' in the Bathtub by Fritz Freleng, but the shorts we all know and love today evolved across decades because of the people hired by Warner Brothers over the years, each coming to work at the studio known as Termite Terrace, part of Leon Schlesinger Productions, the studio that worked with Warner Brothers to make the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoons, and which eventually became Warner Brothers Cartoons, Inc. And every creator that joined Schlesinger in the early years was able to bring their own unique vision and style to the Looney Tunes, which helped to shape what we think of as the series as a whole. Bob Clampett, Tex Avery, Sid Sutherland, Virgil Ross, and many more established what a Looney Tunes cartoon was, and kept it going for decades because of their never-ending imagination. But the subject of our video today is the one and only Chuck Jones. From the time he joined the studio in 1933 to when Warner Brothers fired him in 1962, more on that later, Jones directed, wrote, and otherwise contributed to more than 300 Looney Tunes cartoons. Throughout the decades, Jones developed immensely as an animation director. At first criticized for his early shorts that were very close to the sincere works of Disney animation, which he cites as an inspiration in his younger years, to eventually becoming the preeminent voice of Looney Tunes. What I have tried to do always was to realize that my field was laughter, said Jones. That I should never make a film without trying something new. That something should never be ostentatious. And that I should always put in something just for myself. That I should ignore what the public wants without once ignoring the public. Above all, that I must never underestimate the public. And finally, I must remember that 8 to 10 hours of every day was a big portion of my life. And what I did during that time should be happy and stimulating. But the kind of animated comedy that I enjoy most requires public acceptability. Over the next several decades, Jones became one of the major voices to define Bugs Bunny and create several major characters, including Wile E. Coyote, the Roadrunner, Marvin the Martian, and Pepe Le Pew, as well as make some of the series' most beloved shorts. One Froggy Evening, Duck Amuck, Rabbit Seasoning, Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century, the list goes on and on. One important note to understand about the creation of each Looney Tunes was that none of them were scripted out like a traditional film. Instead, they were pieced together with storyboards that had dialogue written underneath in the style of a cartoon strip in a newspaper. Imagine a Sunday comic strip with 140 sketches, said Jones. We stuck up anything at random, just any idea, maybe an expression, and then as they had some relation with one another, we brought them together. And this is where Chuck Jones worked with writers like Ted Pierce and Michael Maltese, with Jones as the animation director drawing the keyframes, known as the extremes, for the characters throughout each short. And Jones in particular drew a ton of these for each of his shorts. This meant that Jones was in full control of the layout poses of every character throughout each cartoon he directed, with the animator then drawing the many frames that come in between to bring them to life on screen. In conjunction, Jones would work with background animators to design the world the story happens in. Sometimes it's a familiar setting, like the desert of the Roadrunner cartoons. Other times it's something that's just as important as the characters, like the constantly shifting landscape of Duck Amuck. But in any case, these backgrounds would work with the character animation to create a seamless production that's actually produced separately. As the decades wore on, you can really see not only a refinement of the Looney Tunes shorts, producing higher quality animation on limited budgets, but also a willingness to consistently push boundaries. The Looney Tunes were created as the unorthodox, edgier alternative to the often sentimental and self-serious work happening at Disney. That means that there's a lot of dark and modern feeling humor that holds up really well today, as well as the very specific references of their times that don't work as well for people unfamiliar with what's being skewered. And then, of course, the racial or sexual stereotypes meant for comedy, but really playing as offensive today. And no, saying that there's sexist or racist stuff in old media doesn't mean that I'm canceling the Looney Tunes. We should understand the shortcomings and failings of old media to better understand the context that they were created in, so that we can continue to appreciate them and analyze them for what they were. The result is that Looney Tunes stands in animation history as a fascinating piece of satire of the culture and times surrounding it, and in doing so, becoming an important part of that same culture and time. I think I don't just speak for myself in saying that different Looney Tunes shorts were my first exposure to many different celebrities, films, books, stories, and, as is the case for the short I'm talking about today, music, before ever actually seeing or hearing the original subject itself. In many ways, satire of the thing can become just as important as the thing itself in the lasting public memory. It distills the subject down to its essence, and lets us easily understand its importance and its inherent silliness in no time at all. For cartoons that were essentially made to warm up the crowd for the real movie afterward, Looney Tunes have stayed in the public consciousness and made a greater impact than many of the films they jerked the curtain for. And I think that comes down to 3 reasons. 1, these cartoons were, and still are, genuinely funny. Most Looney Tunes will keep you enthralled for their short runtimes, and the best of them are some of the funniest and smartest things I've ever seen. 2, they almost all feature memorable characters, most of which were featured in dozens or hundreds of shorts, planting them in the minds of fans who were excited to see their favorites back at it again whenever a new short premiered. And 3, the production on these is extremely high quality. While Warner Brothers didn't have the budgets of rival Disney, they were smart about their money. Most of the Looney Tunes are scored by a full orchestra, co-opted from sessions used for other films. And when combined with some really fantastic above and below the line animators, it gave these scrappy productions a true air of quality. Each of these elements is in its fullest effect in what many have declared to not only be the greatest Looney Tunes short, but one of the best pieces of animation in the history of the medium. Chuck Jones and Michael Maltese's What's Opera Doc from 1957. What's Opera Doc sees Elmer Fudd, like dozens of times before, hunting Bugs Bunny. Only this time, their story is played as a parody of operatic Norse mythology, specifically pulling from Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle of operas, and specifically from Die Valkyrie, using several pieces from Wagner's operas as Elmer attacks Bugs with magical lightning and thunder, only for our rabbit hero to pose as a beautiful Valkyrie, tricking the hunter into falling in love with him. Like a lot of Elmer Bugs shorts, it's an extended prank by the rabbit on the hunter, only this time ending in Bugs dying. Of course, it's all part of the play, with Jones in essence playing the opera completely straight for stronger satire. What's Opera Doc is directed by Chuck Jones, written and storyboarded by Michael Maltese, produced by Eddie Seltzer, and stars Mel Blanc as Bugs Bunny, who of course you probably know as the original and definitive voice of Bugs, and Arthur Q. Bryan as Elmer Fudd, actually the 4th person to voice the character. The short is animated by Ken Harris, Abe Levitow, and Richard Thompson, with assistant animation by Willie Ito, effects animation by Corny Cole and Harry Love, ink and paint by Chandra Powris, Luis Cuarto, Manon Washburn, and Ashley Lupin, layout art by Maurice Noble, background art by Philippe Degard, editing by Treg Brown, camera operating by Ken Moore, and musical arrangement by Milt Franklin. I know some people get bored with credits, but give me a break. We're talking about the real work that goes into something that I think people don't often really think about. That's only 20 people total to bring to life this brilliant piece of animation. barely a drop in the bucket compared to most studio productions today, even animated shorts. What's Opera Doc has a lot of similarities to Jones and Maltese's Rabbit of Seville, another favorite of mine, from 1950. Using composer Gioacchino Rossini's 1816 opera The Barber of Seville as the basis for another Elmer Bugs encounter, only with a much more slapstick-heavy approach where the two rivals wind up on stage, rather than literally being in the story. Like so many shorts centered on the hunter and his supposed prey, Rabbit of Seville is all about Bugs turning Elmer into his punching bag by taking a premise and pushing it so far past its breaking point that the hunter essentially can't pull himself out of the joke. In What's Opera, we begin already in that space, fully engulfed in the opera and not sure if either Bugs or Elmer know they're in one, which perfectly sets up the piece's final punchline. What makes the short so special within the larger pantheon of the Looney Tunes is that Jones essentially gamed the system behind its production, so that he could give it more time and attention than it would normally have. By the 1950s, each of the WB Shorts directors had to churn out 10 cartoons a year on a 5-week schedule with 2 weeks vacation, meaning that every 5 weeks on a cascading schedule, come rain or shine, each director needed to have their latest short ready to be shown in theaters to keep a continuous stream of cartoons coming. However, Jones would juggle the schedule to get more time for an ambitious project because, by this point, he knew just how long he needed to get a short done. "We knew it was going to take a lot of effort to do What's Opera Doc," said Jones. "So what we did was we all got together and decided to do a Roadrunner picture in 3 weeks," which we did. This meant that Jones and crew, who were faking their time cards, had 2 extra weeks to work on What's Opera. Of course, the business office at WB was none the wiser, and thought that every cartoon took exactly 5 weeks to make, never knowing the way their animation teams would shift around work for their passion projects. Of course, that's nothing negative about a Roadrunner cartoon. Personally, I really love the Roadrunner and Wile E. Coyote stuff, but it's mostly bare bones, with a lot of the same backgrounds, setups, and gags reused with slight variations from short to short. That's the charm of those cartoons. You know generally what you're going to get, and you can see the joke coming from a mile away, but you can never quite guess how the gag will zig or zag in the moment. The Looney Tunes, if you watch enough of them, are iterative, working on a tight schedule and a limited budget, needing to make sure the audiences were satisfied with what they had, and typically no more than 7 minutes max with credits, meant that most of the Looney Tunes team would go back to the same well over and over again. Sometimes that resulted in diminishing returns. Other times, it meant stronger, sharper, and weirder new versions. Really, so many of the great Looney Tunes are variations on recurring stories. Daffy will always get frustrated and escalate just how bad his circumstances are because of his temper. Pepe Le Pew will always be a creep until the moment he can finally get the girl. And Bugs and Elmer will always be a story of the hunted outsmarting and making a fool out of the hunter. What's Opera Doc is doing the exact same thing they did in their first ever story together with A Wild Hare back in 1940.
What's up, Doc?
Beyond using the basic Bugs-Elmer dynamic, What's Opera Doc uses Bugs and drag. Yes, the central joke can be distilled down to, ha! Gay! And the gigantic fat white horse that Bugs rides can first be seen in the World War II short Hare Meets Hare, a skewering of the Nazis with Bugs also dressing up as Brunhilde, and tricking Hermann Göring into dressing up as Siegfried to humiliate him. Chuck Jones in particular loved to use classic music in his shorts. Zoom and Board uses Dance of the Comedians from The Bartered Bride by Bedřich Smetana. The long-haired hare has Bugs take over as conductor of Largo el Factotum from The Barber of Seville by Gioacchino Rossini for Revenge Against a Singer. Baton Bunny has Bugs conduct Morning, Noon, and Night in Vienna by Franz von Suppe. And Rabbit of Seville, of course, uses The Barber of Seville Overture by Rossini. And in What's Opera Doc, Jones uses the overture from The Flying Dutchman by Richard Wagner from 1843, Pilgrim's Chorus from Tannhauser by Wagner from 1845, and Ride of the Valkyries from Die Valkyrie by Wagner from 1870. And that leads us to the inspiration behind the cartoon. Richard Wagner's Der Ring der Nibelungen, or The Ring of the Nibelung, often referred to as the Ring Cycle, is a series of 4 German operas, Das Rheingold, Die Valkyrie, Siegfried, and Götterdämmerung, that tells an epic story pieced together from many different Norse, German, and Scandinavian myths, centered on the theft of the magical Rheingold, and the forging of a magical ring from it by the dwarf Alberic. The ring is stolen by the leader of the gods, Wotan, to build his fortress of Valhalla. but the ring dooms everyone who encounters it, including Wotan's daughter Brunhilde, a Valkyrie, his son Sigmund, and his grandson Siegfried, and culminating in Ragnarok. Ultimately, everything is destroyed, including Valhalla, with Wotan, Brunhilde, and Siegfried all dying with the utter destruction of the world. It's an extremely complex series, with the entire saga told over the course of 4 nights and taking up to 16 hours to complete, and includes some of the most famous classical music of all time. It took Wagner 26 years to write the entire cycle, completing it in 1874. With the production becoming one of the most famous and influential in the entire history of the opera. So the idea of shrinking it down to just 6 minutes is itself part of the satire. The other major focus of the short's parody is Walt Disney's Fantasia, which had been released 17 years earlier. I've previously done a video on Fantasia and its highly ambitious art, which was met with a scuttled roadshow and a financial failure. And while I really love a lot of Fantasia, it's absolutely the type of sincere and emotional approach to animation that made it the antithesis of the Looney Tunes and the perfect subject of their satire. In particular, Night on Bald Mountain is spoofed by the opening Sturm und Drang, with Elmer's shadow evoking Chernabog's hellish summoning, only to be deflated by the silly little man behind it. Later, Bugs' flower-covered dance is a direct reference to Dance of the Hours and its silly ballet. And when you really watch the short, you can see that while it all works as a parody, that's essentially only because the Elmer-Bugs feud is overlaid onto a very faithful summary of Wagner's Ring cycle. The music was right, said Jones. It was what they did in front of it that made it funny, we hoped. What made the thing was Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny addressing Wagner head-on. That dedication to creating a loving homage extends to how the crew brought Bugs and Elmer's ballet moves to life, with real-life ballet dancers Tatiana Ryaboshinska and David Leshane photographed and used as reference for the characters' perfect dance moves. The 2 dancers were also used as reference in Fantasia, bringing even more authenticity to the parody here. What's funny is that What's Opera works as a satire because it jokingly puts itself on the same level as Fantasia and the Ring cycle. Here, a silly 6-minute cartoon dares to stand next to massive works of art. It's the equal amount of guts and self-deprecation that made Looney Tunes special. And the funny thing is that it completely works. Jones and Company's animation is so sharp, with perfect timing and expressions operating at the exact right down to the frame pacing, that sells both the drama and the comedy. The music, using and then parodying Wagner, has become about as well known as the source material.
Kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit, kill the wabbit.
And the performances of Blank and Brian are so funny while still putting on strong singing performances, filtered through a comedic and very exaggerated voice. In the end, it even elicits real pathos and regret. The strong polarities of emotion versus comedy are what make each extreme work so well.
Poor little bunny, poor little wabbit.
Maurice Noble was the main designer that worked with Jones on the short, taking Jones's storyboards and working out the exact layouts that could be used in the cartoon. He gave me tremendous leeway, said Noble. We had a previous designer who wanted to have the proscenium arch right on stage all the time. I said, oh, the hell with that. I wanted to have super grand opera. We threw away the arch immediately and started in on a grand scale. The long shot, the big shadow, Chuck worked it back into the picture, and it was kinda back and forth all the way through. And throughout the production, Jones gave Noble free rein, resulting in hyper-stylized colors and architecture to play off the story. The backgrounds and designs of What's Opera Doc are really incredible if you're paying attention to them. Noble's designs take complex architecture and geography, and then flatten it out to almost cardboard standee-like imitations. And everything is so exaggerated to emphasize the comedy beneath the quality. The short was also composed of 104 different shots, a massive increase from the average 60 or so shots for a tune, making it much, much bigger than anything that had ever been done before. And with each shot came a new background, a new camera angle, and new character animations. But with ambition and new approaches came new challenges, as the Warner Brothers higher-ups pushed back on the new approaches and styles taken on something that was so tried and true. They didn't like the idea of Elmer being lavender and purple and every color because they've never been done that way, said Jones. Fortunately, all of our battles were never gigantic. They were minuscule, but they were absolutely defined by the need for the picture. What's Opera Doc would go on to be released on July 6, 1957. Of course, at the time, it wasn't nearly so lauded. Several of Jones's Looney Tunes were nominated for and even won Academy Awards, but this one got nothing. Over time, the short's legacy began to grow and grow thanks to repeated showings in theaters and on TV. And in 1992, the United States Library of Congress named the cartoon as culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant, and inducted it into the National Film Registry, the first cartoon short to ever be inducted. The next two WB cartoons added to the registry: Duck-a-Muck and One Froggy Evening. That's right, all Chuck Jones. And in 1994, What's Opera Doc was ranked as the greatest cartoon in animation history in Jerry Beck's The 50 Greatest Cartoons of All Time, a ranking pulled from surveying 1,000 professional animators, proving the short's esteem amongst generations of professionals in the craft. What's Opera Doc represents essentially the high point and true potential of the Looney Tunes, crafting a magnificent experience that manages to be just as funny as it is beautiful in just a little more than 6 minutes. And for Jones, it seemed to be the high point as well. The director never made another Elmer and Bug short again afterward, adding a touch of sentimentality to the hunter carrying off his prey to Valhalla at the end.
Well, what did you expect in an opera? A happy ending?
In the years that followed, Jones continued to make dozens of shorts, until his rule-breaking ways got the better of him. Chuck and his wife, Dorothy Jones, moonlighted and wrote the script for the UPA feature film Gay Paris, and when Warner Brothers discovered he had violated his exclusive contract with the studio, they fired him. But Jones wasn't done making classic cartoons, going on to direct Dr. Seuss's How the Grinch Stole Christmas, Horton Hears a Who, a new Tom and Jerry series, and many more cartoons before eventually returning to WB and making new Looney Tunes, slowly winding down his career in the decades before his passing on February 2nd, 2002, at the age of 89. A titan of animation, a king of comedy, and a creator that inspired the careers and imaginations of millions. To me, the story of Chuck Jones and What's Opera Doc is just one lens to understand just how special the classic Looney Tunes really were. They were the product of a small group of artists able to unleash their imagination and work around the inherent limitations of their size, budget, and time. The result is so many incredible cartoons that changed the medium forever. And no matter what a studio chooses to believe about them now, the Looney Tunes will forever be one of the great pieces of modern American art. Thanks for watching today's video, and after all these years, I've finally talked about the Looney Tunes. It's kind of surprising to me that I've never actually made a video on any of the Looney Tunes shorts or the movies, but I guess I never had the spark to do one until now. And like I said in the video, this was really inspired by Warner Brothers basically erasing the Looney Tunes from all of their online presence. Of course, there's a lot of ways to still watch Looney Tunes, and it really highlights the importance of physical media and actually owning the things that you love. I have quite a few of the collections of the Looney Tunes on Blu-ray, but there's also a massive Internet Archive project to preserve all of the Looney Tunes shorts as well, and you can find that there pretty easily if you're interested in seeing some of these awesome cartoons. Of course, What's Opera Doc is one of the high points of the entire series, and I thought it was a no-brainer for me to base this video around. But there are so many Looney Tunes shorts that I truly love. As a kid, Duck Dodgers in the 24th and a half century was probably my favorite, but these days it's kinda hard to beat Duck-a-Muck for me, although I also have a soft spot in my heart for the two Robin Hood parodies as well, Robin Hood Daffy and Rabbit Hood. Those are both just so funny. And really, there are so many amazing Looney Tunes, you can really kinda never run out of them. Just when you think you've seen them all, you'll probably find another one. And like I mentioned in the video, some of these have some really outdated stereotypes that may be offensive to you if you're not expecting them, but they really are a product of their time and a lack of awareness. Once you know that, it's easy to jump in, and there are so many great ones out there that have none of that. And I think it's just a real shame that WB has made these so unavailable now for so many people, because these are truly cartoons that can speak to every generation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on not just What's Opera Doc, but Looney Tunes overall, and some of your own favorite Looney Tunes shorts. And if you're interested in me talking about more Looney Tunes or more classic cartoons, please tell me which ones you'd like for me to cover in the comments below. As always, a huge thank you to my patrons and members for their continued support. And if you'd like to be a patron or member, it's only $2 a month for early access to every video, and exclusive Patreon and member-only reviews, with the latest one voted on by my supporters to be Stephen King's The Running Man, both a review of the book written under the pseudonym of Richard Bachman, and the Arnold Schwarzenegger starring adaptation. But that won't be the last Stephen King video I do this year. So until next time, I hope that you're taking care of yourselves, and showing some appreciation to the Looney Tunes.